This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle. And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Lodero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón.
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porter says cheated.
What was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and our subscribers. We're recording on Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. I am your host, Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today are my co-host, Aaron Campo, and our engineer, Lickett. Look, I'm not going to try to convince anyone that the Sounders were particularly fun or exciting or even good, but this is the playoffs, and that stiff simply doesn't matter. The Sounders, of course, won Monday's Game 1 in a shootout and are now one more win away from advancing to the Western Conference semifinals. So without puffing this up or doing too much more of an intro, Aaron, let's just start there. How much do we even care that how the Sounders played in this game?
Yeah, I think that scoring would have been great. Obviously, winning in regulation would have been great. Would have been really good for the confidence. But Houston's a very good team, defensively especially. They're not a great scoring team, obviously, and they came into the game with the idea of going to penalties, and it's going to be really difficult to score against them when they set out with that in mind. And are there teams that I think probably would have had a better chance of breaking them down? Sure. But I also think there are teams that would have been more vulnerable to the times that they did actually attempt to counterattack. So I'm not super worried about it. I think that it's totally reasonable to expect this Sounders team is going to have difficulty scoring against this Houston team when Houston sets out to play the way they did. I think in the second game, if it's as difficult where Houston knows they have a win and they're at home, maybe that's a little more cause for concern, although the Sounders, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the Sounders are going to be most likely, I think, certainly at this point without Jordan Morris in that game, which certainly hurts. But I don't know. I think it's not that I don't care that they weren't able to score, but it just doesn't unduly worry me, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair way of putting it. Another thing I was thinking about is, like, let's just say the penalty that had originally been called on that Christian Roldan header had been rewarded. The Sounders convert it and they win 1-0. I don't know that would make me feel any different at all about this game. I mean, so they, just scoring isn't the problem. It was they didn't create a whole ton of scoring chances. Now, if Christian converted that header, maybe I would have felt a little better. But
sure.
I just don't know that there's a lot to be said about getting to, like, I actually saw, like, I think even one of our partners on the Sounder Heart Podcast Network were, like, actually seemingly, like, mad about this result and sort of, like, feeling like the Sounders almost should be apologizing for needing penalties to win this game. I mean, I think that's, like, I don't want to, like, put words in anyone's mouth, but there is definitely a sentiment on Twitter and somewhat on the site of people being really frustrated with the result or with the way they played. And I don't know. I don't know that there's any value in being frustrated. The Sounders know they need to score some goals they're probably gonna have to score some goals to win MLS Cup. But playing against a team who, I don't know if they came into the game just fully expecting to go to penalties, but for sure it looked to me like they came out in the second half without any real intention of pushing the game. And then once they went down to 10 men, it was game over in terms of them looking for a goal. Like, there was a stretch at the end of the first half, Houston had 55% of the possession. Something like 2/3 of that possession was in their own half. They just were not pushing at all. And I think the Sounders deserve some credit for that. I thought they played well defensively, but it was just a very conservative game plan, I thought, from Houston. And given that, the Sounders have struggled like a lot of teams do when teams just pack it in, and that wasn't their night to break down the Sounders had some good opportunities on set pieces. I would have liked to have seen them do better on those. But, nothing tells me that the Sounders shouldn't advance from this series.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the way the playoffs have gone so far, RSL and Minnesota was a 0-0 shootout. RSL
and Minnesota and the road team won that shootout.
Yeah. Columbus was held scoreless at home. NYCFC on the road, but they were held scoreless. I mean, it's, good teams, good attacking teams have been held scoreless against teams who are trying to hold them scoreless in the playoffs. And that's kind of just the way these things go. It's definitely frustrating, I think, to have what feels like positive momentum, at the end of the season. Obviously, the last game of the season wasn't a great outcome, but I think generally people felt pretty good going into the playoffs. And I think to have a 0-0 at home like that, where the Sounders couldn't create a ton,
air out of the balloon.
It does, for sure. But I think that right, wrong, and different, this is the Sounders team, and we have seen them score over the course of the last 2/3 of the season. They're not offensive dynamos, but we know they can score plenty, right? Like, we know they are not the anemic team we saw last year or in the first third of the year. But it's really, really difficult to score against teams that are playing that defensively. Fortunately, that's probably the only time they're going to have to deal with a team playing that defensively in these playoffs.
Right. I mean, Houston is going to have to open up a little bit I would think that Houston doesn't feel comfortable just playing for penalties again.
Right.
Not the least of which is the Sounders looked great in that shootout. Like, I don't want to let that get lost.
Yeah.
Rui Diaz opening the shootout with a Panenka that I have to imagine Steve Clark scouted as a real possibility, and just sort of that's how good Raul is at this. I think that's his third or fourth Panenka of his last 5 or 6 attempts. He's doing this a lot. Like, this is kind of his move.
Yeah. I mean, if it's working that well, I don't really have any problems with it. It's difficult to save if you pull it off. Like, it is. I think people think of it as being risky. I'm not convinced it's any riskier than just trying to hammer the crap out of it into the top corner, because you're a lot more likely to miss the frame entirely trying that. So,
I mean, if you are good enough to disguise it, it's not a particularly risky move. I think where it becomes risky is when you're not as good at disguising it.
Right.
But then, Rusnak was clinical. He had a, totally clinical finish inside the right post. I guess, I don't know, right, left. He hits it across his body. And then the last 3 Sounders penalties were all just like absolutely roofed, almost like one better than the one before it. Totally unsavable, all 3 of those penalties. It was very impressive.
Yeah, it was. It's the best I've ever felt coming out of a Sounders shootout. I think 2016 MLS Cup final, obviously, accepted, but it was just, Steph Frey is not a great penalty stopper. I think we can all admit that at this point.
We can admit that.
So you're going to have to convert them, because I just don't foresee a reality where Brian Schmetzer is pulling stuff Fry to put Andrew Thomas in when it looks like penalties are on the cards. That just doesn't...
I mean, he was asked about it at training today, and he basically said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I think that's somewhat Brian Schmetzer just sort of being an old school coach of, I don't want to overthink this. And I don't know, it's, we can make too much out of how good Andrew Thomas is at stopping penalties, but he has stopped 3 of 4 penalty attempts in his professional career. And then in the shootout earlier this year against Louisville, he had 2 saves and he converted his penalty. So I understand why people are excited about Andrew Thomas. And I think you can make a pretty valid argument that he should be, that's a worthwhile move, but then you also have to save a sub. You have, there's risk associated with it.
Absolutely.
But, it was, Steph guessed right on, I think, 3 of the attempts. He probably should have saved the first one. And I think, you can sort of give him some credit for guessing correctly on the one that was ultimately missed. And the guy, who knows if that was part of why he missed it. But yeah, he only has 5 penalty saves and 63 attempts in his career, which is not good. And he hasn't had to face a lot of penalties lately, but I'm pretty sure that's the first time since, I guess, I want to say since the 2010 shootout with the Timbers that the Sounders converted all 5 of their attempts.
Yeah, it definitely had been a while. I will take your word on it on the actual date, but it felt like it had been longer than that, even somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure they converted, or maybe they only had 4 attempts in that. They might have only needed 4 attempts against Portland that time. I don't think they missed any though. But this might be the first time in the MLS era that they've converted all 5 of their attempts.
Yeah. And they were all no doubters, I would say.
Yeah, it was great. It was the most enjoyable penalty shootout I've seen the Sounders participate in. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But let's put it aside though. If it's up to you, do you sub in Thomas? Like, let's just I think we know what Brian's going to do, which is not sub it, but would you do it?
I think that if there's a reality where that's not going to hurt Steph Fry's confidence, I probably would.
Yeah.
But that's just like that unknowable thing, right? Of like,
right.
How is he going to react to that?
What's the knock-on effect of this?
Exactly. I think there's a great chance Steph's the kind of guy that's like, yeah, I suck at penalties. Let's,
I will say that one of the risks of doing it, I suppose, is if you do it in the first game of the playoffs, you're sort of committing to like doing
always,
it
always.
And
right.
That seems tough, because there's going to be instances probably where you can't do it. And now you've sort of telegraphed that you don't believe in your guy to pull it off.
No, that's a great shout. And I think I would love to see some data on it too. I don't know that I've ever actually seen data on, what's the percentage of times the teams do this where it works, it pays off. Either they win or, the guy that gets subbed in makes a couple of saves, right? Anecdotally, I feel like I don't know how often I've seen it work.
I know the Netherlands national team had the Newcastle goalkeeper who was really good at penalties. But I think that when you see it, it's usually because the guy on the bench has this reputation for being like a penalty expert, right?
Right.
It's not just this guy is, it's not a 70-30 thing. It's like, no, it's like you have Tim Malia on the bench and it's like the whole reason he's on your roster is to stop penalties.
Right. Yeah.
And that's, who knows, maybe Andrew Thomas will develop into that sort of player, but he hasn't faced a lot of penalties in live action yet. He's only been in 1 shootout for the first team. I didn't go back and look at what his record was for the Defiance. I'm sure he's been in a handful of shootouts with the Defiance, but there's a logical brain that says you just, even if it's 70-30, you put in the better goalkeeper. But I do think there is some knock-on effects that have that need to be legitimately considered. And, if Steph Fry is your number one goalkeeper, I think you sort of have to, it does make sense, I think, to keep him in.
I think so. And I do think there's a fundamental difference between the MLS Cup playoffs and the World Cup or something of that nature, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not your club team. It's not the coach that you work with on a day-to-day basis. It is you're here representing your country and this guy is good at this thing. So you're just going to have to deal with it.
Right. The whole reason he's on the roster is for this moment.
Right. It's coming and you're just going to have to live with it. And I think it's just a fundamentally different paradigm, at the club level.
Yeah. And I know people have said this has happened. I don't remember this exact, like, I know there are situations that are like this, like a player came in late and had to face penalties or something like that. But I don't know how many times a coach has made a conscientious decision to do it in MLS. And then the other big thing to come out of it, or there's a few big things to come out of this game. Another one was Jordan Morris went down with an injury in the 52nd minute. Just today, actually shortly before we started recording, Brian Schmetzer went on KJR and said that they got the MRI results back. It's not anything serious, but that they are still inclined to not use Morris on Sunday, which I think makes sense. You have a buffer. Why not? If you can give him a little extra rest, why not? And I don't feel great about the option. Like I've especially on this roster, I really love Jordan. I think Jordan Morris gives them the best chance. I will be shocked if it's not Raul Ruidiaz who gets the start. But I think there's a valid case to be made for Danny Musovski getting the start, if for no other reason than I think there is something to be said about making sure you have Ruidiaz available for the shootout. And I don't think he's a 90-minute player right now.
Yeah, he's not. Although that doesn't mean he's not going to play 90 minutes, unfortunately.
Right. Yes.
We have seen it at times this year.
Yes.
I definitely think that if I'm Brian Schmetzer and I'm inclined to start Musovski, that is when I try to sell Raul on. It's just like, hey man, we need you for penalties. We're going to try to get penalties. Danny's probably going to take a beating, and we just, rather whoever's playing at striker in this game is probably going to take a beating because we're not going to be holding on to a lot of possession. So we want you fresh and we want you not to beat up when it comes to time for penalties. But I think the real reason is that I just think Danny Musovski is a better player than Raul Ruidiaz right now in most facets of the game, especially in terms of the things that I think are going to be important from the striker position in this game. Musovski is not a great hold-up guy, but he's much better than Raul, and I think it's going to be important. I think having an outlet when you're under pressure, because I think Houston is going to be pretty dominant possession-wise in this game.
Yeah.
Both just in terms of that's the way they like to play, and also I think the Sounders are going to be happy to let them try to play that way. And so in situations like that, you need somebody that can take some of the pressure off, keep some possession up top, and that's just not Raul's strong suit, and it hasn't been for a while. And yeah, and I think also, like, I don't think Raul is any more likely to score a goal than Musovski out of anything but one of his why the hell not sort of shots, right? Like, and that's more valuable to me with 15 minutes left in the game. Having a guy that can create something out of nothing, especially if you do give up a goal and you're chasing the game, right? So I don't know. I don't think Musovski has been bad this year. I think most people think he has been bad because he hasn't scored a goal.
He hasn't played a ton. That's really what it is.
He hasn't played a ton, and I think all of the other stuff has been good when he has played. I think he's been effective at hold up. I think he's been decent at winning aerial balls. He's had some good combination play with guys. The goal that we thought they scored against RSL at home in that game that would have iced it, he was great on that play. It just shows the kind of stuff he's capable of, right?
Right.
And so he would be absolutely who I'd be starting in this game. But I think you're right, unfortunately, that it isn't likely to happen. And I think there is a better than average chance that he is going to play all 90 minutes if it looks like it's headed for penalties.
Yeah, I would hope. Yeah, I don't know. I would like to think there's some more thought that goes into it than that, but you might be right.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes Nos Arietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, he just to give it a little bit of context, he has, I'm looking at his stats right now. He's made 4 starts this year. He has played in 24 games, but he only has he has 500 minutes.
Yeah, he gets a lot of garbage time minutes where he's not being asked to go out there and score a goal.
Right.
If you, I mean, that's not what he was being asked to do against Houston on Monday night. I don't think. I'm sure they would have loved it if he had, but I don't think he was being put in there for that purpose.
He's not been put in positions to succeed. I think we can, in terms of, he's never been out there. Like and when he started, it's not like he's starting with the first team. Like he's almost exclusively started when they're heavily rotating the lineup.
Yep.
And so it's not like he's had I think it's a little unfair to judge him on his, like on the balance of his play.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
But I would be inclined to start him as well. I think that they've sort of painted themselves into a corner a little bit where they almost have to start Rui Diaz based on sort of the managing the egos and whatnot, which I don't love.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is what it is. And then the other really big moment of this game, obviously, was the red card, which ended up not being super consequential in the context of this game, but it does have knock-on effects for the second leg. Coco Carrasquilla, who just won CONCACAF Player of the Year. This is a very good player. I don't know if people like how many people. This is like maybe their best player. It was a weird incident where João Paulo pulls down an attacker. He gets a yellow card, rightfully so. And then Jackson Regan sort of like picks up the ball, which one is want to do, right? And Carrasquilla responds by shoving him to the ground. And then that starts a whole melee. And in the melee, Carrasquilla sort of like kind of swings at somebody, but the thing that I think he ends up getting kicked out for is he kicks at Albert Rusnak. Originally, it's not caught. Originally, what it goes in the book as a yellow card for João Paulo, a yellow card for Jackson Regan for delaying the restart, a yellow card for Carrasquilla for pushing him down, and then that was going to be it. But then VAR intercedes, says, nope, you need to look at this, ends up kicking Carrasquilla out, and now he's going to miss the next game. Like I said, it didn't have a huge impact on this game because Houston was able to see it out, but this is a big absence for them.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a very good player that is prone to some really boneheaded decisions.
Yeah,
kind of seems like his MO. I think that Houston is not great at home. I think that's one of the interesting things about the dynamic in this series is that Houston's record at home is actually worse than their record on the road in terms of wins and losses. They have 7 wins at home, 8 on the road. They don't lose at home very often, right? But I do think that
it really is like last year's Sounders. It's uncanny how similar they are to last year's Sounders.
Yes, absolutely. And I think losing somebody that is such a key part of what they do, arguably their best player, like you said, is really makes this game interesting to me. I think if Jordan was available for this game and the Sounders could kind of do their normal thing, I'd feel really, really good about their chances in this game, because Houston's not going to be able to just sit back and absorb pressure in this game. They have to score.
Right.
They can't depend on getting to penalties. And I think, a team with Jordan Morris leading the line is going to be extremely happy to be in those circumstances. But I do think Houston losing one of their key pieces, and especially a guy that's so important to what they do in the attacking phase, where they are not good at all. They have fewer goals than the Sounders this year
by a lot.
By 4. They've scored 47.
Okay, yeah. You're right.
To 51.
It was not as much as I thought, but you're right.
But still, I mean, the Sounders did not score for like 3 months to start the year, and Houston has been this sort of tepid offensively the whole year. So yeah, that's going to hurt them quite a bit. I'm not sad about it. I'm glad that went to VAR, because I thought it was pretty egregious. I think there's honestly a chance that they could have had 2 red cards on that play. Frankly,
yeah, Hector Herrera also came in pretty hot. They had several players that came in pretty hot.
Yeah, if they lost both of those guys for this game, I would be on cloud 9. They're two, unquestionably their 2 most important players. That would be pretty good. But
alas.
yeah, it's alas. One is better than none. So it'll be interesting. I feel very good about the Sounders' chances to get this to penalties. The thing that I worry about, honestly, the thing that I think that makes them getting it to penalties most difficult is somewhat counterintuitively, I think if Raul is playing up top, they're just not going to be able to keep the ball, and it's going to cause problems.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first start. If assuming Raul starts, this will be the first time he started since the game at Kansas City on June 8th. That really sort of it was the literal midpoint of the season, but it also is sort of the symbolic changing of when everything sort of turn around, because Rothrock started playing the next game. Jordan Morris got installed at forward, and the team that they are now effectively started coming together after Ruidiaz went to the bench, and he hasn't started since then. He's only played in about half the games since then as well. And the biggest thing that I was worried about from that Kansas City game, I don't know how much people remember about that game, but that was the game where it just didn't look like he was interested in leading the line. Like he wasn't making runs. He couldn't hold the ball up. It just he just looked so done. And
yeah,
I do think that he, in his subsequent appearances, has looked less like that. But again, we haven't seen him try to start since then. So I do think there's legitimate questions about, how many minutes he has in his legs. He did, to his credit, I suppose, he managed to get off 4 shots in about 40 minutes against Houston, but none of them were even close to being on target.
No, the best chance he had, sorry to interrupt, the best chance he had, I did actually think that run was really encouraging. The right move was finding Rothmark at the back post. Obviously.
Yeah, he had if he had been able to square that ball, it was, I want to say it was early on in his appearance, right?
Pretty shortly after he came on, yeah.
Maybe 70th minute, something like that.
Yeah.
He had a chance he had Rothrock wide open at the back post, and if he had been able to square it, I don't want to make it sound like it was an easy pass, but it was a pass that he's certainly capable of making. And if he had squared it across, had to hit it with some pace, there was a good chance that Rothrock was there, and instead he ends up, shooting it into the stands. But you're right, it was a good run, and we give Jordan a lot of credit for good runs too. So I don't have a problem giving him credit for a good run. But there is another big lineup decision that the Sounders are going to have to make, and that's what they do about Pedro de la Vega, who started in this game. I think it was maybe overblown how bad he was. Yeah. I know a lot of people were frustrated with his performance. I thought he actually looked really good on the counter press. Like, he was very active defensively. And he just was not, but he really wasn't sharp offensively. I think he had the right ideas. He just wasn't quite connecting. He ends up coming out after 52 minutes. He clearly was upset to be coming off. I thought Brian had a perfectly fair explanation, which was with Raul in there, we wanted to have two real wingers who are, more playing to his feet and whatever. That I thought that made sense. But it does beg the question, if you were going to use Georgie with Raul last game, should you be doing the same thing? Like, should you be bringing De La Vega off the bench in this game too?
Yeah, it's a fair question. For the record, I agree that the assessment of him being terrible in this game was kind of bizarre to me. I think that it is totally fair to hold him to a higher standard because of the position that he holds on the team, the resources they've spent on him, all of that stuff, the expectations. But I think if once he's on the pitch, right, there's no point in evaluating his performance any differently than anyone else's. And I just didn't think he was actively bad. He's definitely not the kind of performance you want from a designated player that cost, 8 figures in acquisition costs. But I just, it's not like he was Alex
in
Cassidy
isolation. It's not
right. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say in isolation, it's not really a particularly notably bad performance. It's just that he hasn't been, it looked like he was making a lot of progress the last few weeks in terms of looking sharper, looking better, looking like he was on the same page with teammates. And this felt like like he reverted, he backslid a little bit in that sense. But the reality is he doesn't have a lot of sort of goodwill built up with the fan base right now because he hasn't scored. He hasn't set up a bunch of assists. So at some point he needs to start producing. I'm kind of coming to peace with the idea that it might not be this year. It is funny. I've read this a few times from various national pundits who have said, well, the Sounders are going to go as far as De La Vega takes them. I don't know if I buy that at all. Like,
no, he's not important to this team right now at all. I mean, like he hasn't been important to their success down the stretch at all.
Like if he starts putting it together all of a sudden, I think that raises their level.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't think they need him to be a star for them to continue to be very competitive and to keep putting up zeros. Frankly, I think it's gotten lost a little bit. They've given up 1 goal in their last 5 games.
Yeah.
They've given up 3 goals in their last 8. This is a very good defensive team. It's not a fluke that they held Houston scoreless. I think it's entirely possible that they will do it again.
Yeah, I think likely even. I'm totally agree. I think that the De La Vega is a really fun media narrative. I think it's a compelling story. Like, oh, can he finally deliver? But it's just like, I'm just not spending a lot of time thinking about him because he hasn't been part of the team's success. To your question though, I think that even if Pedro had not been below par in the last game, and even if, Raul wasn't starting, you can make a case that this is Georgie is just a better fit for what this game is
this
like.
This kind of game, like. Sure.
And yeah, I would probably be inclined to start Georgie. I think that having somebody that can get out on the break on his own, somebody who can beat guys on the dribble, having one of those guys on each side is going to be important to this game. I don't think there's going to be a lot of patient build-up play resulting in good chances.
Yeah, and we were sort of talking, there was some talk of this on the Discord about playing, maybe you play Pedro or even Rothrock as sort of a false 9, and that allows you to get Pedro, Rothrock, and Georgie all on the field together. And I guess you could maybe talk yourself into that. But honestly, Rui Diaz effectively is going to be playing as a false 9. Like, they have to game plan with the assumption that, and they should almost embrace that, I think. Like, send your wingers up high and if Rui Diaz's inclination is to drop back and to not be pushing the line, don't ask him to do it all of a sudden. Like, that's not the game. Like, that's not playing to his strengths. That's like it. I understand why you want that. I understand why they've built their team around a player who can do that. But if you're going to start Rui Diaz, don't ask him to be something that he just no longer is anymore.
Right. I think that's the key to it. I think that he can still be good at some stuff, but you absolutely have to change your game plan. And he cannot be central to your game plan. Like, he can't be the guy that the team revolves around. He has to do a job just like you'd be expecting out of Danny Mazovsky. He's going to do it a different way, obviously, because he's not a big tall guy that can hold people off and win a bunch of headers. But he's still capable of doing it. I think he just can't play the way he tends to play. And you do have to make tactical adjustments. You know, you do have to plan on your attacks coming down, pretty much entirely coming down the wings. You've got to hope that your goal scoring can come from there, or, you know, maybe you're putting in enough shots that you're getting rebound opportunities, because that is one thing Raul can still do is poach a goal in the box. But if he just goes out there and tries to play the same way he did in 2018, it's not going to be great, I don't think.
Yeah, so I guess to sum up what I think we're both agreeing probably should happen. I don't know that this will happen, but it could. I think you either start Pedro and Musovski, or you start Rui Diaz and Georgie.
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
And then in the midfield, I assume Obed just replaced. Like, João Paulo was not bad. I didn't think he was good enough to feel like you have to put him back on the field, though.
No, definitely not. He's very slow. He's never been fast, but
he's definitely not. Yeah, he's lost a step.
And when you're the kind of player he is, losing a step is pretty disastrous, I think.
Well, and I think I would rather, again, if we're sort of gaming this out, I think he's much better used as a player to help see out a win at this point than absolutely. He is a player who's you want starting the game. Like, I feel much more comfortable with Obed and Christian in the midfield than I do JP and Christian, or
because
JP
I think
Obed.
JP can still be very effective in a pure stopper type role, where he's not trying to get forward, he's not trying to contribute to attack, he's just trying to break things up and keep possession. He can be very good at that, and I think either if you are able to grab a goal and you want to see out the win, like you said, or you're just trying to get to penalties late, I would love to have him on the bench rather than having come off it, 50 minutes or whatever.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that covers just about everything. I should add, we went pretty hard on the ref last game, and I don't think Ted Unkel was great in this game, but he was way better. I found him mostly inoffensive. I will also add that we submitted a question post game about the red card incident, and he gave a perfectly clarifying answer that the yellow card that Kvaratskhelia got was a completely separate incident, or was separate from his red card, and that the red card was for basically kicking the attacker or kicking Rusnak. So hey, that's all we're asking. Just give us a little something.
Yeah, there are a lot of refs that Sounders fans hate that I have no idea why they like. There are definitely some where I'm like, yeah, I understand why we hate that guy. But I've never thought Unkel was. I'm sure he's had bad games against us, but
I think he's just got like a bad vibe. I think that's he has this sort of like kick me sort of vibe about him.
He definitely has like a gym teacher kind of vibe to him.
Yeah.
Which, fair enough. But I'm always trying to remember what he did that made people hate him so much. And I'm sure he's given a silly red card to us or not called a penalty or something. But I'm never that upset when I see him in the center. I don't know.
Yeah, that was sort of my reaction too. I wasn't really worked up about it, and I didn't think there was some odd advantage calls, but there's always going to be if you get focused on disliking a ref, you can find it's never hard to find
for sure
calls that are bugging you. But I felt like it was important to give some, to acknowledge when a ref does not piss me off.
Yeah, no, I think it's good to do. I think it's just always good to remind ourselves that MLS refs on the whole are actually quite good compared to a lot of other leagues. And
the line that I've been using is that MLS refs are better relative to the quality of play than probably any league in the world. That doesn't mean they're the best refs, but you look at the Premier League, just to use a easy example. Best, maybe the best league in the world, nowhere near the best refs in the world.
No, I would take MLS refs over Premier League. Like if we could do a straight swap, there's no way I'd do it. Absolutely not. They're bad. They're actively bad.
Yeah. And so like I just think that sometimes that's like I think what kills me is when people say like, oh, it's the refs that are keeping me from being more into MLS, and it's just like, you don't want to watch soccer. That's fine.
No. Yeah. I mean, it is so subjective, and it varies from game to game in a way that I think few sports do. American football is probably the next closest, but there are so many refs calling so many different things that it's just like, it feels like there's some, homogeneity. I have so much trouble with that word. That just isn't present. Like, it feels like in soccer, referees are encouraged to manage the game their own way. Whereas in other sports, it's like, no, you have a job to do as a referee, and this is how you do the job. And that's part of why, soccer is fun, feeling out the referee. And as long as it's consistent, I'm good.
Yep. I'm with you. All right. Well, that's a good place to end this. I want to thank our sponsor, Full Pool Wines. Of course, I want to say thank you to our subscribers. Just as a reminder, you can become a Sounder at Heart subscriber for as little as $25 a year. The $75 a year, you get access to our Discord, where we have lots of good conversations. That keeps going. We keep growing every month. We see little uptick. So I want to say thank you to everyone for doing that. Of course, thanks for doing this, Aaron. Thanks to Lickit for producing this thing. I am Jeremiah Shan, signing off for Nos Audietis. Remember, you'll never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one!